A sharp, guttural bark echoed through the quiet forest as K9 Chinook's ears perked. Officer Ethan Cole instinctively halted, his breath catching in his chest. "What is it, boy?" he murmured under his breath, the unease rising like smoke in his gut. The sun was beginning to set over the Appalachian foothills, casting long shadows across the winding trail, but what caught Chinook's attention wasn't the fading light, it was something buried deep in the woods. Ethan followed Chinook's lead, every step more hesitant than the last, until the trees parted and the unmistakable sight of an old school bus emerged from the underbrush. Its yellow paint was faded and peeling, its wheels sunk deep into the earth like a forgotten relic. As Ethan approached, a chill ran up his spine. It wasn't just a bus. It was a mystery, and it had been waiting for them. Ethan Cole had lived in Pine Ridge for most of his 35 years. His father had been a local sheriff, and his mother a schoolteacher, so he knew this town like the back of his hand. Yet, no matter how many times he walked through the woods with Chinook, there was always something new, something unpredictable, about the Appalachian wilderness. It was a quiet place, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where secrets had a way of slipping into the cracks unnoticed. But not today. Not when the dog had found something so out of place, so unsettling, that even the stillness of the trees felt like a warning. The further they ventured into the woods, the more Ethan's instincts kicked in. He wasn't just patrolling anymore. Something about this discovery felt personal, as though it was drawing him closer to a truth he hadn't been prepared for. Chinook's fur bristled as he trotted toward the bus, his nose twitching in the air. The dog was calm, his movements precise. Ethan followed, carefully stepping over the roots and underbrush. He had seen abandoned things before, old barns, broken-down cars, remnants of a past people had long forgotten. But this bus, there was something about it. It was the first thing he noticed as they stepped closer, the vines. They were thick and strong, growing like tendrils wrapping the bus in a tight embrace. The windows were either cracked or completely shattered, and the rust on the metal was so deep it was almost as if the forest itself had claimed ownership. Yet, despite all the decay, the bus stood proud. It was as though it had never fully given in to time. Who leaves a school bus in the middle of nowhere? Ethan muttered under his breath. His eyes darted across the landscape, expecting to find a sign of who it belonged to. But there was nothing. Just the wind rustling through the trees, and the faint scent of damp earth. Chinook stood at attention in front of the bus, his stance unshakable. The dog was no rookie. He'd been through his share of difficult cases, tracking down criminals, sniffing out drugs, even finding missing persons. But this wasn't a crime scene. Not yet. But it sure felt like one. Ethan squatted down to Chinook's level, running a hand through the dog's thick coat. "Good boy," he said softly, trying to calm the unease that was creeping into his bones. The dog turned his head toward the bus, then back at Ethan, his expression unyielding. Chinook had found something. Ethan was sure of it. They circled the bus, looking for any sign of life, any indication of who might have left it there. Ethan's flashlight illuminated the faded remnants of what appeared to be a school logo on the side, half worn away by years of exposure. His heart began to race as he thought back to the local legends, the strange stories of missing persons in the area, the rumors of people vanishing without a trace. But those were just stories, right? Then his eyes landed on the ground beneath the bus. Something was out of place. There, nestled between the twisted roots of a nearby tree, was a scrap of fabric. Ethan crouched down, examining it carefully. The fabric was torn, stained, and weathered, but the color was unmistakable. It was part of a child's backpack. His pulse quickened. Why would a child's backpack be here, in the woods, in the middle of nowhere? "Chinook, stay close," Ethan ordered, his voice low but firm. The dog immediately obeyed, his eyes still locked on the bus. Ethan reached for his radio, but something stopped him. He didn't want to call for backup yet. Not until he knew what they were dealing with. The forest had a way of playing tricks on the mind, making you see things that weren't there. But this didn't feel like a trick. It felt like the beginning of something bigger. Ethan cautiously approached the bus, his hand resting on his holster. He had been a police officer long enough to know when to be cautious and when to act fast. He wasn't sure what kind of situation he was walking into, but something told him that this wasn't just an abandoned bus, it was a clue. A key to a much deeper mystery that had been buried beneath the surface of Pine Ridge for years. Titan's low growl echoed through the stillness, and Ethan tensed. "Easy, boy," he murmured, but the dog's warning was clear. As they stepped inside the bus, the musty smell of decay mixed with the fresh scent of the forest air. The interior was eerily quiet. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of life, but the remnants of the seats, broken and discarded, told a different story. It was as if someone had lived here, had once called this bus home. The thought sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Who did this bus belong to? He asked aloud, though he knew no one would answer. It was a question he was sure wouldn't have an easy answer. But there was something here. Something hidden. Chinook barked again, louder this time. Ethan's flashlight swept over the bus, landing on a small, battered suitcase tucked beneath one of the seats. It wasn't just any suitcase, it was a child's suitcase. The faded pink floral pattern seemed out of place here, in the middle of nowhere, abandoned. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Was this part of the mystery? Was this where the child's backpack had come from? This was no ordinary abandoned vehicle. The forest had kept its secrets for too long, but it seemed like Ethan and Chinook were about to uncover them, one terrifying step at a time. The next day, Ethan stood at the edge of the Pine Ridge woods, staring down at the school bus that had become the focal point of his investigation. The forest had an almost eerie stillness to it as the light of day slowly crept in, filling the space with an unnatural glow. Ethan adjusted the straps of his gear and glanced over at Chinook, who was once again focused, his sharp eyes scanning the bus and the surrounding area like a seasoned veteran. Chinook had been Ethan's partner for 3 years now. The bond they shared was more than just that of a handler and dog, it was a trust that had been built through countless hours of training, teamwork, and shared moments of danger. When Chinook growled, Ethan knew there was something worth investigating. And today, the dog's low growl was like an unspoken warning, a sign that whatever they were about to uncover was more than just a simple mystery. Ethan had made a decision overnight. He wasn't going to rush into this. Pine Ridge was a small town. People had a tendency to gossip, to make up stories. But Ethan had learned over the years that sometimes, the truth was hiding in plain sight. His gut told him this wasn't just some abandoned relic left by someone looking for a cheap place to park their van for the night. No, this was something deeper. Something buried. He walked to the front of the bus, scanning the perimeter one last time. There was no sign of anyone having been here recently. The area was undisturbed, save for a few animal tracks near the bus's base. Chinook's keen nose was already working overtime, sniffing at the damp ground where the forest seemed to have swallowed the bus whole. Ethan glanced at the bus's door, still slightly ajar. With a nod to Chinook, Ethan pushed the door open, the rusted hinges squealing in protest as if the bus itself were reluctant to reveal its secrets. Inside, the faint smell of mildew and old wood assaulted Ethan's senses. The bus, long past its prime, was little more than a shell. The seats were half empty, some broken or discarded, others still clinging to the frame by a thread. The windows were either shattered or fogged up with time, allowing only fragmented views of the forest beyond. Ethan stepped inside cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The light danced across the rows of seats, landing on something that immediately caught his attention, a small, pink suitcase wedged beneath one of the broken seats. It was the same kind of suitcase children used, the kind with colorful designs and characters, out of place in a forgotten, decaying bus in the middle of the woods. Ethan's hand tightened around the flashlight, his mind racing with the implications. The child's backpack had led them here, and now this suitcase appeared to be part of the same story. Stay alert, Chinook, Ethan muttered under his breath. The dog sat just outside the bus, watching his handler with an intensity that told Ethan Chinook wasn't convinced this was a safe place either. He crouched down, lifting the suitcase with careful hands. It was heavier than he had expected, the old fabric creaking under his grip. He unzipped it slowly, his eyes darting around the bus, making sure he wasn't caught off guard. Inside, he found clothes, nothing unusual, but then, tucked beneath the pile of faded garments, was a notebook. Ethan's fingers hesitated for a moment before pulling it out. It was a small, weathered journal with a black leather cover, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. He flipped it open to the first page. The handwriting was faint but legible, a small comfort in a place that otherwise felt consumed by the weight of time and decay. Day 1. I can't help but wonder if we made the right choice. The woods are quiet, but they are also watching us. There's nowhere else to go. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned the page. Day 2. Noah has asked me if we're safe here. I tell him we are. But the truth is, I'm not sure anymore. I hear noises at night. The sound of footsteps. But it's the silence during the day that's the worst. It's like we're being forgotten. Ethan's mind reeled as he read on. The entries were dated just a few weeks ago. This wasn't some relic from the past. Someone had been here recently, someone who had been hiding, and someone who had been trying to escape something or someone. Ethan felt the weight of the journal in his hands, the responsibility of knowing that this could be the first step in solving a case that, until now, had only existed in whispers and rumors. Pine Ridge wasn't a place where things like this happened. People didn't just disappear. But now, Ethan was beginning to think they did. A noise from outside the bus broke his concentration, and Chinook's ears perked up, his low growl vibrating through the still air. Ethan immediately stood, his body going on high alert. He peered out the bus door, scanning the dense woods beyond. "What is it, boy?" Ethan murmured, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. Chinook's gaze was fixed on something in the trees, and as Ethan moved toward the door, his heart began to race. Something was wrong. There was someone, or something, out there. But the woods remained silent, holding its breath. Ethan stepped cautiously out of the bus, the ground soft beneath his boots. Chinook's focus remained unbroken, his tail stiff. Ethan followed the dog's line of sight, but all he could see were the towering trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The sound of birdsong echoed in the distance, but there was something unsettling about the silence around him now. "Nothing there, huh?" Ethan muttered, rubbing his hand through his hair. But Chinook's stance hadn't shifted. The dog wasn't just reacting to a noise, he was sensing something Ethan couldn't see, something dangerous. He turned back to the bus. There were no more obvious signs of life, but the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. The journal, the suitcase, it wasn't just about a family hiding from their past. Someone had left something behind in these woods. And someone was still watching. The sense of urgency weighed heavily on Ethan as he made his way back inside the bus. The air was thick with anticipation, the smell of old wood and mildew now somehow more oppressive than before. As he took one last look at the abandoned bus, he knew this was just the beginning. Whoever had been here, and whoever had been watching, was going to find out that the secrets of Pine Ridge were about to be dragged out into the open. And they weren't going to be happy about it. The morning after Ethan's discovery, the fog still clung to the trees, shrouding Pine Ridge in an eerie mist. He couldn't shake the feeling that the previous day's find wasn't just an abandoned bus, it was a message. Or maybe a warning. As he sat in his patrol car, staring out over the woods that seemed so quiet and tranquil, Ethan couldn't help but feel like the whole town of Pine Ridge was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Chinook sat beside him, his head resting on Ethan's knee, his usually alert eyes softer today, as if the dog sensed the weight of the moment too. The K9's silence was a rare thing. Usually, Chinook was the one to break the stillness of a quiet day, his tail thumping against the door or his ears flicking at every little noise. But now, the dog seemed lost in thought, the same kind of unease hanging in the air between them. Ethan glanced at the worn journal again. He had spent the night reading it cover to cover. The entries were haunting, words from someone who had been trying to outrun their own life, hiding from something that had chased them for far too long. But who was it? And why did they leave everything behind? His mind kept going back to the bus. The suitcase, the child's belongings, the journal. It all pointed to a family, Eric Harris and his son Noah. But they weren't just any family. They were a family running from something, and whatever it was, it had been following them for months. The thought made Ethan uneasy. In a town like Pine Ridge, where everyone knew everyone else's business, how could something like this happen without anyone noticing? How could they just disappear into the woods without a trace? He ran his hand through his hair, pushing back the frustration. There were too many questions and not enough answers. "All right, Chinook," Ethan said as he opened the door to the car, "let's figure this out." The morning passed in a blur of phone calls to local contacts, checking missing person reports, and revisiting the bus site to look for any new clues. By noon, Ethan was no closer to finding answers. The only thing he knew for sure was that this wasn't just some random case. This was personal. And it had something to do with the people of Pine Ridge. The breakthrough came when he decided to head to the town's small library, a place where generations of Pine Ridge's residents had passed through, checking out books, gathering news, and maybe, just maybe, leaving behind something important. Ethan had lived in Pine Ridge his whole life, but there were stories here that even he didn't know. As soon as he walked through the door, the smell of old paper and ink hit him, familiar and comforting. The librarian, Mrs. Delaney, greeted him with a warm smile, the kind that only people who had lived in small towns for decades could offer. "Detective Cole, what brings you in today?" Mrs. Delaney asked, adjusting her glasses. She was in her late 60s, with a kind face and a sharp mind. She knew the history of this town better than anyone. "I'm looking into something," Ethan said, his voice low. "It's about a family, Eric Harris and his son Noah. Have you ever heard of them?" Mrs. Delaney's face shifted. It was subtle, but it didn't go unnoticed by Ethan. "I remember them," she said softly. "Not well, but I remember them. They lived here a while ago, and then they just disappeared." Ethan leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "Eric was a quiet man," Mrs. Delaney continued, "kept to himself mostly. I believe he worked in construction. But he had a little boy, Noah. They lived on the outskirts of town, in that old cabin by the river. Eric was always on the move, fixing up the house or working on something, and Noah would always be running around, playing in the yard. But then one day, they were just gone. No note, no explanation. People thought maybe they moved, but no one really knew for sure." Ethan's mind raced. "When did they leave?" "A few months ago, I'd say," Mrs. Delaney replied. "It was around the time the construction crew started work up on the old logging road. They just vanished. It was like they were never there." Ethan's pulse quickened. The timeline was matching up. The bus, the suitcase, the journal, it was all pointing to something bigger. Someone was hiding something, and Eric Harris had known it. "Do you know anyone who might have known more about them?" Ethan asked, his tone steady but urgent. Mrs. Delaney thought for a moment. "Well, there's Tom, a local handyman. He did some work for Eric and had coffee with him now and then. You could try asking him. He might have more details." By the time Ethan and Chinook made it to Tom's place on the edge of town, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the road. Tom's small, run-down house stood next to a field of tall grass, and the smell of sawdust and motor oil hung in the air. Ethan knocked on the door, and a few moments later, a man in his mid-40s answered, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked tired, as if the weight of the world had been placed on his shoulders. "Detective Cole, right?" Tom asked, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "That's right," Ethan said. "I'm looking into Eric Harris and his son. I understand you knew them." Tom's eyes narrowed slightly, and he took a step back, motioning for Ethan to come in. The interior of the house was cluttered but cozy, with tools and old furniture strewn about. It felt like the kind of place where time moved slowly, and secrets were easier to keep. "Sit down," Tom offered, gesturing to an old armchair. "I know who you're talking about. Eric, he was a quiet guy, kept to himself. He and his son were good people, though. I didn't see them much after the first few months, but they were always polite, always said hello." Ethan leaned forward. "What happened? Did they leave town?" Tom hesitated, glancing toward the window as if he expected someone to be watching. "It wasn't just about moving," he said quietly. "Eric, he wasn't running from just anyone. He was running from something dangerous. People didn't know it, but he had been in some trouble before he came here. He was trying to protect Noah." Ethan's stomach sank. This wasn't just a simple case of a family moving away. Eric Harris had been protecting his son from something, or someone. "What kind of trouble?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tom glanced at the door again, as if considering whether he should continue. Finally, he sighed and sat down opposite Ethan. "A few months ago, Eric told me he had to disappear, that he was making sure his son was safe. He said he'd be okay, but that he couldn't stay here anymore. I didn't ask any more questions. I knew enough to leave it alone." Ethan's mind spun. There was something much bigger going on than he had originally thought. Someone, or something, had been after Eric and Noah. And now, whatever it was still out there. Waiting. Ethan stood up, his resolve hardening. "I need to find them, Tom. I need to know what happened." Tom nodded slowly. "I hope you do, Detective. But be careful. Whatever Eric was running from, it's not gone. It's still out there." Ethan didn't respond. He knew that whatever had been chasing Eric Harris was just beginning to show its face, and he had no idea what kind of danger he was walking into. The sun hung low over Pine Ridge, casting long shadows across the town as Ethan and Chinook set out again. The previous day's discoveries weighed heavily on his mind. The journal. The suitcase. The quiet conversations with Tom. It all pointed in one direction: Eric Harris had been trying to protect his son, Noah, from something far darker than anyone could have imagined. And that darkness, Ethan suspected, was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Ethan adjusted the collar of his jacket, his eyes scanning the winding path ahead. He hadn't expected to be chasing ghosts when he first joined the force. Small towns like Pine Ridge didn't have big city problems, at least, that's what most people thought. But this wasn't just a case of a missing family. This was about a threat that had been hidden away for far too long, and it was beginning to unravel before his very eyes. Chinook walked beside him, his gait purposeful, eyes alert. The K9 was his partner, his closest ally. If there was one thing Ethan had learned over the years, it was to trust Chinook's instincts. And right now, the dog was on edge. The air around them felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. Ethan could feel it too, a weight pressing down on him, a sense of urgency that was hard to ignore. They were heading toward the old logging road on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, a place that no one in town liked to talk about. The road had been abandoned for years after a fatal accident involving a logging truck. It was one of those places where the stories were more legend than truth, but Ethan had a feeling it wasn't just the accident that had people staying away. It was what had happened after the accident. The things that no one dared discuss. The logging road was narrow, surrounded by thick pines and underbrush. As they neared the old bridge that spanned the river, Ethan noticed something odd. There was a break in the trees, a spot where the undergrowth had been trampled. It wasn't just the usual animal tracks that Chinook often followed, these were human prints. Deep impressions, left by boots, and recently made. The hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood up. Someone had been here recently. Someone who didn't want to be found. "Stay close, Chinook," Ethan muttered, his hand instinctively moving to his gun. "We're not alone." The dog's low growl confirmed Ethan's suspicion. Whatever was hidden in these woods wasn't just a mystery. It was a dangerous secret, and now it seemed like that secret was being guarded. They pressed forward, following the trail deeper into the trees. Ethan's mind raced. Could this be where Eric and Noah had been hiding? The map that Tom had shown him earlier, the one marked with the location of the old cabin by the river, was leading him here. But why? What was the significance of this place? When they reached the clearing near the riverbank, the sight that greeted them only deepened the mystery. It wasn't just a cabin, or even a shack. It was something far more ominous, an old, decrepit building, almost like a bunker, camouflaged by thick vegetation and overgrown vines. The structure itself was made of stone and metal, its rusted exterior blending in with the natural surroundings, making it nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a typical hideout. This wasn't a place for people running from debt collectors or small-time criminals. No, this place had been built for something else. Something far more dangerous. Ethan motioned for Chinook to stay back as he moved closer to the entrance, carefully stepping around the broken, weathered stones that littered the ground. The air around the bunker smelled different, heavier, like the remnants of old oil and metal. Ethan crouched near the entrance, inspecting the locks on the rusted door. They were old, but still solid. His fingers brushed against the cold, decaying metal, feeling the years of neglect that had worn it down. This was a place that hadn't been touched in a long time. But it wasn't abandoned. Not entirely. A faint noise from inside the bunker stopped Ethan in his tracks. It wasn't a voice or a human sound, but something much more subtle, like the rustling of paper or fabric. Ethan motioned for Chinook to move up, and with a slow, deliberate step, they approached the entrance. Without thinking, Ethan yanked open the rusted door, the old hinges groaning in protest. The space inside was dimly lit, but there was enough light filtering through the cracks in the walls to make out the shape of something, or someone, moving in the shadows. "Who's there?" Ethan called out, his voice steady, but his hand gripping his gun tightly. A figure stepped into the light, their hands raised in a peaceful gesture. It was a man, middle-aged, dressed in tattered clothes, his face weathered by time and stress. His eyes were wide with fear, and he seemed just as startled to see Ethan as Ethan was to see him. I didn't think anyone would come," the man stammered, his voice shaking. "You're not supposed to be here." Ethan took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man hesitated before answering, his voice a whisper. "I'm just trying to stay alive. Just like Eric and Noah. They didn't deserve what happened. They had to hide. They had to leave before it was too late." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the confirmation he needed. The man was talking about Eric and Noah Harris. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been forced into hiding, and whatever had driven them to this bunker was still out there, lurking in the shadows. "What happened to them?" Ethan asked urgently. The man lowered his hands, his eyes darting around as if he feared someone was listening. "It's not safe for me to say. But Eric, he knew too much. He uncovered something about the town. About the people who control it. They found out, and they came after him. They came after all of us." Ethan's pulse quickened. This was bigger than he had imagined. The man was talking about a conspiracy, something buried deep within the town itself. And it wasn't just about a missing family. It was about power, control, and secrets too dangerous to be exposed. "I know what you're thinking," the man continued, his voice growing weaker. "But you're too late. They're already watching. They know you're here." Ethan didn't wait for the man to say more. He motioned for Chinook to stay alert as he moved toward the bunker's interior. It was time to uncover the truth, whatever it was, and bring it to light. But as he stepped into the darkness, one question echoed in his mind: had Eric and Noah truly escaped, or had they been taken? And who was left to stop whatever had been set in motion all those months ago? The days had become a blur. Every lead Ethan had followed, every clue Chinook had uncovered, had only deepened the mystery of Eric and Noah Harris. The bunker, hidden away in the dense woods, was only one part of the puzzle, but it was a significant one. It felt as if the more Ethan discovered, the more questions appeared. Pine Ridge, a town that once felt like home, now seemed like the backdrop for something much darker, something buried beneath the surface for far too long. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It was late, the darkness of the night pressing against his office window. Chinook lay at his feet, resting quietly, his eyes half closed. The dog, like Ethan, was exhausted. They both needed answers, but the town felt like a labyrinth, its hidden corridors leading only to dead ends. The journal. The suitcase. The bunker. Everything was connected, but Ethan could sense that there was one more piece to the puzzle, one that would unlock the truth and explain why Eric and Noah had gone into hiding. It wasn't just about their past, it was about something much larger. Something far more dangerous. That's when it hit him. The local government. The construction projects. The connections that nobody talked about. Ethan had been so focused on the family, on Eric and Noah, that he had overlooked the bigger picture. Pine Ridge wasn't just a quiet town, it had its own secrets, secrets that only a few had the power to keep buried. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. Chinook's ears perked up, and the dog stood, sensing the shift in Ethan's mood. Without another word, Ethan grabbed his jacket and his flashlight. It was time to visit someone who might know more about what had been hidden in the town for years. The next morning, Ethan pulled up to the old town hall, a brick building that had been standing for generations. It was one of the oldest buildings in Pine Ridge, and it had witnessed its fair share of history. But today, Ethan wasn't interested in the town's history. He was interested in the present, and specifically, in someone who had spent years behind the scenes, pulling strings and making sure certain things stayed buried. Councilman Robert Hale had been a fixture in Pine Ridge politics for as long as anyone could remember. Ethan had known Hale as a kid, his father had been a sheriff, just like Ethan, and Hale had always been the kind of man who knew everyone's business, whether they wanted him to or not. But in the years since Ethan had joined the force, Hale had become more elusive, his power growing as the town's problems seemed to fade into the background. Ethan parked his car and approached the front steps of the town hall. Hale's office was on the second floor, the windows overlooking the small town square. As he entered the building, the quiet of the morning was broken only by the sound of his footsteps. The receptionist, a young woman named Jessie, glanced up from her desk, offering a polite but neutral smile. "Detective Cole," she greeted him. "What brings you in today?" "I need to speak with Robert Hale," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "It's urgent." Jessie hesitated but nodded. "He's in his office." "I'll let him know you're here." Ethan didn't wait for her to finish. He walked past her desk and up the stairs, his boots echoing in the stillness. As he approached the door to Hale's office, he paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. This wasn't going to be easy. Hale had always been a man of influence, and Ethan had a feeling that whatever secrets Pine Ridge held, Hale was right at the center of them. He knocked once, and before waiting for a response, he opened the door. Inside, Robert Hale sat behind a large, oak desk, papers scattered in front of him. He looked up as Ethan entered, his expression unreadable. The man was in his late 50s, with graying hair and sharp features that made him look older than he actually was. He had the air of someone who had seen it all and wasn't afraid to make tough decisions. The kind of person who thrived in small towns, where influence could be wielded without much scrutiny. "Ethan," Hale said, his voice smooth. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need answers, Hale," Ethan said bluntly. "And I think you have them." Hale leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of him. "Answers? About what, exactly?" "Eric Harris. His son, Noah. They didn't just vanish, did they?" Ethan's eyes never left Hale's, searching for any sign of guilt. "They were running from something. Something you know about." Hale's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't flinch. "I don't know what you're implying, detective." "You know exactly what I'm implying," Ethan pressed. "The construction projects, the land deals, the things you've been hiding. Eric knew something. And now, so do I." For a moment, there was silence between them, the weight of Ethan's words hanging in the air. Finally, Hale let out a slow breath and leaned forward. "You've been digging too deep, Ethan," Hale said, his voice low but calm. "Sometimes, it's better not to ask questions. You don't know the full picture. Pine Ridge has always been a small, quiet town. We don't ask questions about the past." "I don't care about the past," Ethan shot back. "I care about what happened to Eric and Noah. And I care about what's happening now." Hale's gaze hardened. "I think you should leave this alone, detective. For your own good. There are things in this town, things that have been buried for a reason. You might not like what you find if you keep pushing." Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm not backing down." Hale's face remained stone cold, but Ethan could see a flicker of something behind his eyes, fear, or perhaps guilt. It was hard to say. But Ethan wasn't done yet. "You knew Eric Harris, didn't you? You knew he was trying to expose something. Something you didn't want getting out." "I don't have time for this," Hale said abruptly, standing up and turning away from Ethan. "You should leave before you make things worse." Ethan stood his ground. "It's too late for that, Robert. I'm taking this as far as I need to. If you're involved in whatever happened to Eric and Noah, I'll find out. And when I do, you'll be held accountable." Hale didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned back to face Ethan, his expression a mixture of frustration and something else, something darker. "You're playing with fire, Ethan. And when it burns, you'll wish you'd stayed away." Ethan left Hale's office, his mind racing. He knew Hale was hiding something, but the councilman's cryptic warning only made him more determined to uncover the truth. Whatever had happened to Eric and Noah, whatever secrets Pine Ridge was holding, Ethan was going to find them. And this time, no one, not even Robert Hale, was going to stop him. As he walked down the hall, Chinook by his side, Ethan felt the weight of the investigation settle into his bones. He was on the verge of something big, something that would change Pine Ridge forever. But he wasn't sure if he was ready for what that truth would look like. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, staring at the documents he had found in the hidden compartment of the bunker. His mind raced, piecing together the puzzle that had been slowly unfolding since the moment Chinook had first barked in the woods. The truth was becoming clearer, but it was also darker than anything he had imagined. The folder in front of him contained more than just notes or maps. It was evidence that tied Pine Ridge, its leaders, and its businesses to something far larger and far more dangerous than local corruption. The construction projects. The land deals. The hidden pockets of money funneling through the back alleys of the town. These weren't just small-time schemes. They were connected to a network that stretched far beyond the mountains of Appalachia. Ethan's fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. The deeper he dug, the more it became clear that someone had been running Pine Ridge from the shadows for years, someone powerful, someone untouchable. And they weren't just trying to cover up a few bad investments. They were covering up something much worse. Chinook, Ethan murmured, rubbing his hand through the dog's thick fur, this isn't just a missing family. This is something bigger. And we're in the thick of it now. The dog, lying on the floor next to him, let out a low whine, sensing his handler's anxiety. Ethan wasn't sure how much more he could take. His gut told him that the worst was yet to come, but there was no turning back now. He couldn't stop. Not when the people responsible for Eric and Noah's disappearance were so close. And not when he knew that their silence had been bought with blood. That afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to confront Robert Hale. The councilman had been playing games for far too long, and Ethan had had enough. Hale's warnings had only pushed him further down this path. Whatever the councilman knew, whatever he was hiding, it was time to bring it into the light. Ethan arrived at Hale's mansion at the edge of Pine Ridge, a sprawling estate that looked as though it belonged in a different era. The house was grand, too grand for a town like Pine Ridge, with its towering columns and polished stone steps. It was a symbol of Hale's power, a reminder to everyone in the town who was really in charge. Chinook was by his side, as always, the dog's sharp senses alert to the subtle changes in the air. Ethan had learned over the years to trust the dog's instincts. If anything was amiss, Chinook would be the first to sense it. "Stay close," Ethan murmured as he approached the front door. He wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd get from Hale, but he had no intention of backing down. Not now. The door swung open before he could knock, and Hale stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. The councilman's sharp suit, immaculate as always, contrasted sharply with the grim atmosphere of the town. "Detective Cole," Hale said, his voice smooth but strained. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I need answers, Hale," Ethan said, his tone low but unwavering. "And you're the one with them." Hale's eyes flickered for a moment, just long enough for Ethan to see the flash of unease. "You're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "I think I understand perfectly well," Ethan shot back. "This isn't just about a missing family. It's about the whole town. Pine Ridge is hiding something, and you've been part of it." Hale's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about. It's not as simple as you think." "I've seen enough," Ethan said, taking a step forward. "You've been pulling the strings, hiding the truth. And I'm going to make sure it all comes out." For a moment, neither man spoke. Then, Hale took a deep breath, his face twitching slightly as though he was calculating his next move. "I didn't want it to go this far," Hale said, his voice suddenly weary. "But you've forced my hand. You need to understand, Ethan, this town, these people, they've been under my protection for years. And it was never meant to go public. Some things are better left buried." Ethan took a step closer, his fists clenched. "What are you talking about?" Hale's gaze flickered to Chinook, and then back to Ethan. "You've been asking about Eric Harris and his son Noah. They were running from something they stumbled upon. The deals, the land, it's all part of a much bigger picture. A picture I've been trying to keep hidden." Ethan's heart pounded. "What picture, Robert?" Hale's jaw tightened. Pine Ridge was never just a quiet little town. It was a front. A place where certain people, powerful people, could make their moves without anyone noticing. Eric Harris got too close to the truth. He found out about the money laundering, the illegal land deals, the connections to the biggest crime syndicates in the region. And that's why he disappeared. Because he knew too much. And he wasn't the only one. Ethan's mind raced. Are you saying the whole town's been involved in this?" Hale nodded slowly. "Not everyone. But enough people. Enough to keep things quiet. Eric and Noah weren't the first to try to expose it, and they won't be the last. But I didn't want to get involved. Not at first. When I realized how deep it went, I tried to pull away. But some people don't let you leave. Chinook growled softly, sensing the tension rising in the room. Ethan's eyes never left Hale. Who's been controlling this? Who else is involved? Ethan demanded. There are too many names to say, Hale replied, his voice low. But I can tell you this, the syndicate is connected to some very powerful people. People with connections that reach far beyond Pine Ridge. The government, corporate interests, even law enforcement. They've all been in on it. It was a system, a network designed to keep the town, and the money, under control. Ethan felt a sickening realization settle in. You've been protecting them. Not just protecting them, Hale said bitterly. I've been part of it. And now, it's too late to back out. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. So, Eric Harris wasn't just hiding from criminals. He was hiding from you. Hale looked away, as if the weight of Ethan's words was too much to bear. Eric thought he could take me down. But you don't mess with things like this. You don't fight against powers that have been in place for decades. He had no idea what he was up against. And now, neither do you. Ethan's blood boiled with anger, but he kept his voice steady. You're going to help me, Robert. You're going to tell me everything. And if you don't, you'll regret it, Hale finished for him, his voice chilling. I don't think I will, Ethan said, his resolve hardening. As Ethan left the mansion, Chinook by his side, the weight of the conversation lingered in his mind. Pine Ridge was about to face its darkest secrets, and Ethan wasn't going to back down. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of corruption and deceit, and he was going to make sure it saw the light of day. But as he walked away from Hale's mansion, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. The people behind this conspiracy wouldn't go down without a fight. And Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for the storm that was coming. The final showdown had arrived. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter around him as he stood outside the dilapidated warehouse at the edge of Pine Ridge. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Chinook stood at his side, a low growl rumbling in the dog's chest. The K9 had been a constant presence in Ethan's life, and now, as they faced the dark heart of Pine Ridge's secrets, Ethan knew that he couldn't do this alone. The warehouse loomed in front of them, an intimidating structure of concrete and steel that had once been the center of the town's industrial operations. Now, it was little more than a decaying monument to the past. The windows were boarded up, and the doors were sealed shut, but Ethan knew it wasn't abandoned. There were people inside. People who were part of the conspiracy that had taken Eric and Noah, and now, they were about to pay the price for their actions. Ethan had spent weeks digging through records, chasing down leads, and following every thread he could find. Every clue pointed back to this warehouse. It wasn't just a storage facility, it was the nerve center of Pine Ridge's dark secrets. The construction deals. The land schemes. The illegal activities that had been buried beneath the surface for years. All of it had led them here. And now, they were going to confront the people behind it all. Ready, boy? Ethan muttered to Chinook, his voice steady but filled with the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. Chinook's eyes locked onto the warehouse, his muscles tense, his nose twitching in anticipation. The dog had been with Ethan through everything, from routine patrols to high-risk situations, and now, the two of them were about to face down the truth. As Ethan approached the front door, he glanced over his shoulder at the quiet town of Pine Ridge behind him. He had been born and raised here, and yet, for the first time, he felt like an outsider. The town he had always known, the town he had sworn to protect, was filled with secrets that he had never suspected. And the people who had kept those secrets were about to be exposed. He reached for the door handle, and before he could pull it open, a voice called out from behind him. Ethan. It was Robert Hale, standing in the shadows near the edge of the building. The man looked like a ghost, his face drawn, his eyes hollow, as if the weight of the past few weeks had finally broken him. "What are you doing here, Robert?" Ethan asked, his voice hard. Hale stepped closer, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I came to help," he said, his voice soft. "I know you've been digging into things. And I know you're about to uncover everything. But you need to understand, there's more at stake here than you think." Ethan narrowed his eyes, his suspicion growing. "More at stake than a family being torn apart? More at stake than the lives you've ruined?" Hale's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw a flicker of regret. "You don't get it. You never will. Pine Ridge was never just a small town. It was a resource, a tool. And the people who control it have more power than you can imagine. They own everything, land, money, even people. You're not just up against the criminals in this town, Ethan. You're up against a system that's been in place for decades. They'll destroy you if you keep pushing." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I'm not stopping until I get the truth. No matter who it hurts." Hale's face twisted with a mix of frustration and fear. "Then you're already too late." Ethan turned his back on Hale and opened the door to the warehouse. The scent of damp concrete and rusted metal hit him immediately, a stark contrast to the fresh air outside. The warehouse was dark, its interior filled with shadows and the echoes of distant footsteps. Ethan stepped inside, his hand on his gun, Chinook following closely at his side. They moved deeper into the warehouse, following the sound of muffled voices ahead. The layout was familiar, old crates stacked high, rusting machinery, and long-abandoned equipment. But there was something new, something dangerous about the place. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and fear, and it wasn't long before Ethan spotted the first of the figures waiting for them. A man stepped out from the shadows, his face partially obscured by a hood. He wasn't alone. 2 others followed him, both armed and ready for a fight. Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his calm. "I've been waiting for you, detective," the man in the hood said, his voice gravelly. "You're a lot more persistent than we expected. But this ends now." Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. "It doesn't end until you're held accountable for what you've done." The man chuckled darkly. "Accountable? You don't understand. You never did. Pine Ridge isn't what you think. It never was." Before Ethan could respond, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the warehouse. The doors slammed shut, and the room was plunged into darkness. The air turned cold, and for a moment, everything stopped. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to adjust to the sudden change. And then he heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. But these weren't the footsteps of his enemies. These were the footsteps of someone else. Someone who was coming for them. Someone who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Stay close," Ethan whispered to Chinook, his voice tight with anticipation. The footsteps grew louder, and then the lights flickered on. In the center of the warehouse stood a figure, a man dressed in black, his face obscured by a mask. He was holding something in his hands, something shiny and dangerous. Ethan's eyes widened. It was a gun, and it was pointed directly at him. "Move," the man ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "You've come too far, detective. It's time to end this." Chinook growled, but Ethan held him back, knowing that the dog wouldn't hesitate to protect him. He needed to think. He needed to end this, now. "Tell me who you are," Ethan demanded, his voice steady. The man in the mask took a step forward. "You'll find out soon enough." The air was thick with tension as the man raised the gun higher, his finger tightening on the trigger. Ethan's heart raced as time seemed to slow, his mind racing through every possible option. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. But before the man could pull the trigger, a gunshot rang out from the far side of the room, and the man in the mask dropped to the ground. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the masked man crumpled to the floor, his gun sliding from his hand. From the shadows emerged a figure, Robert Hale. His face was grim, his hands shaking slightly as he held a revolver in his grip. "I told you, Detective," Hale said, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't let this go on any longer." Ethan didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. Hale had just saved his life, but he had also put them all in danger. "I don't know whether to thank you or arrest you," Ethan said, his voice tight. Hale didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes on the downed man. "This town doesn't deserve to live in the shadow of these secrets anymore. And neither do you." Ethan nodded, his mind still processing the chaos of the past few minutes. But one thing was clear, the truth had finally been exposed, and the people behind Pine Ridge's dark secrets had been brought to justice. As the dust settled and the sirens of backup approached, Ethan looked down at Chinook, who stood by his side, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Thank you for watching. That was the final chapter in our story. We've seen how secrets can tear a town apart, and how even the deepest mysteries can come to light when you're determined to find the truth. What do you think? Would you have done anything differently if you were in Ethan's shoes? Comment below and let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales. The mystery may be solved, but are the shadows really gone? Stay tuned for what comes next.